In tonight's news, His Majesty the King says at the closing session of the World Economic Forum that the Middle East has the potential to bring about real change. The Prime Minister says more than 500,000 Syrian refugees who fled to Jordan place additional strains on its limited resources. And as heavy fighting rages in Syria, European ministers struggle to end division on the conflict. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. The World Economic Forum on the Middle East and North Africa wrapped up 3 days of meetings and debates on the shores of the Dead Sea. His Majesty the King told the closing session that the region had an unprecedented potential for change, calling for overcoming challenges and better living conditions for all peoples. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has sketched out a plan to spur the Palestinian economy with up to $4 billion in private investment. But Kerry, who is trying to revive Palestinian-Israeli peace talks, did not say where the money would come from. Aliyah Touqan has more.
The 3-day forum came to an end with an address from His Majesty King Abdullah. Speaking at the closing ceremony, King Abdullah said the Middle East region has the key goal of building a strong, stable and prosperous future. His Majesty spoke of Jordan's reform policies aimed at opening new opportunities for all, especially young people. The King also touched on the Syrian refugee issue, which he said has affected all Jordanians across the country, and the Syrians urgently need global support.
Refugee hosts like Jordan and homeless Syrians inside and outside their country urgently need global support. Humanitarian aid has been overwhelmed by increased refugee flows. In Jordan, public services and budget resources are being strained. In some places in our north, water, so scarce in our country, is running short. And I speak on behalf of Jordanians across my country, affected by the burden of refugees. The world must step up to its responsibilities and get more help flowing now. My friends, some destinations are global. Peace, security, the environment, economic stability and growth. These are vital interests for all of us.
On the final day, and from the corridors of the Economic Forum, a peace initiative was by a group of business leaders who underlined the urgency to break the impasse in Palestinian-Israeli peace talks. Hundreds of Palestinian, Israeli and global business leaders united to end the Palestinian-Israeli conflict through an economic commentary session. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Israeli President Shimon Peres participated in the session, presenting outlooks to an anticipated peace process towards a two-state solution. Abbas reiterated the Palestinian government's total commitment to peace and security and warned again that the current conditions were unbearable in light of the ongoing settlement building, the changing identity of Jerusalem and the arrests of Palestinians.
إذ أن كثيرا من الشباب وبالذات
Many youth, particularly the new generation, start to lose their confidence in the two-state solution because what they see on the ground makes them truly have no hope in the future that there would be two states, a state of Israel and a state of Palestine alongside each other.
Israeli President Shimon Peres said time should not be wasted in the search for peace between Israel and the Palestinians, calling it a real possibility and describing Abbas as a real partner for peace. For his part, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry revealed at the conference a plan to revitalize the Palestinian economy by attracting $4 billion in private investment. He stressed, however, that the economical plan does not replace the political process of peace talks, warning that any economic attempt will fail without serious efforts by Israeli and Palestinian leadership to return to talks.
The intention of this plan
of all of its participants is not to make it merely transformative, but frankly, to make it enormously powerful in the shaping of the possibilities of the future so that it is more transformative than incremental and different from anything that we have seen before.
While discussions on economy, education, youth figured high on the agenda of the WEF, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the crisis in Syria remained a top priority.
We start speaking with His Majesty the King about Palestine, and we ended by Palestine also on something relating to that. It's always the most important problem facing the Arab world, and I will even say more. It is facing the whole world because it's a test whether our temporary world is ruled by law or not. That's all, very clear, because the situation for 65 years have been definitely all rules, all international agreements, or binding resolution of the Security Council were never carried out fully. They were carried out with respect to Egypt in the peace treaty with Egypt. They were carried out with respect to Jordan with the peace treaty regarding Jordan 1994, and they were partially carried out with respect to Syria in the disengagement agreement of May 1974. But with the Palestinian, nothing up till now, only step by step, which one step forward and one step backwards, and led to nothing.
The three-day forum held under the theme Advancing Conditions for Growth and Resilience came to a close, with agreements signed and initiatives launched. But it comes 2 years after the Arab Spring, at a time of uncertainty and challenges. Ali Tuqan for the News at 10.
Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour met a visiting delegation from the British Royal College of Defence Studies, briefing them on the comprehensive reform process being carried out by the Kingdom. Mansour noted that His Majesty the King took the initiative by beginning the reform process, pointing out that Jordan, despite the ongoing events around it in an unstable region, has been able to meet the aspirations of Jordanians for more democracy, freedom and openness. Mansour said after the economic indicators have started to improve in the wake of the global financial crisis, the events in Syria and their humanitarian repercussions have all made the economic situation in Jordan more difficult and complicated. The Prime Minister also welcomed Chief Executive Officer of the National Bank of Kuwaiti Group, Ibrahim Dabdoub. Discussions focused on work of a privatization evaluation committee formed by the government upon directives to follow up and evaluate the privatization scheme. Mansour said the government views with interest the outcome and work of the committee on evaluating privatization policies and processes. He added that a report by the committee will be presented to all concerned authorities in Jordan, including the Jordanian public and to international agencies. Dabdoub said the committee will hold a meeting tomorrow to discuss issues pertaining to privatization policies and operations. Separately, Mansour and former Lebanese Prime Minister Fouad Senoura discussed developments in the region. The focus was the Syrian crisis and its regional repercussions. Mansour said Jordan's hosting of some half-a-million Syrian refugees is placing additional pressure on the kingdom's limited resources, but due to insufficient international aid. Senoura stressed the importance of finding a peaceful political solution to end the Syrian conflict. A 25-year-old Syrian woman journalist is killed and dozens are dead in new sectarian bloodshed in Iraq. But after this short break, stay tuned.
عن جد مع الغد الكل ربحان. اشترك أو جدد اشتراكك لمدة عامين لتقشر وتربح العديد من الجوائز.
Heavy fighting raged around the strategic Syrian border town of Qusayr and the capital Damascus. It comes amid new reports of chemical weapons attacks by Syrian government forces on rebel-held areas. France is consulting its partners over how to respond to the increasing evidence of chemical weapons use. Britain and France are pushing hard for easing an arms embargo on Syria to support rebels ahead of a peace conference sponsored by the United States and Russia expected next month. Luay Balqar has more.
In a conflict that worsens by the hour, critical decisions on the next steps are made. European Union foreign ministers discussed British and French calls for an easing of sanctions against Syria so weapons can be supplied to the rebels. The debate has gained urgency because of recent military gains by President Bashar al-Assad's troops and allegations of chemical weapons use by the government side. All EU sanctions on Syria could collapse unless they can agree unanimously on what to do about the arms embargo before it expires on June the 1st.
This will be an opportunity for member states to discuss how they want to go forward. What I can tell you is there will be a strong spirit of trying to find a good European solution.
British Foreign Secretary William Hague said the EU arms embargo was part of supporting the diplomatic work that is expected next month. Hague said the Syrian government needs a clear signal that it has to negotiate seriously.
We've tried on all previous occasions on this to make sure that there's still an EU, a common EU policy. But of course, if we can't have one in the future, then each country will have to ensure it has its own sanctions, or the sanctions regime will have to be reconstructed for the future.
Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu supported the potential lift of the arms embargo to give the rebels the right of self-defense.
I definitely support the new lifting arms embargo against Syrian people because this is the right of self-defense. We are talking on a people who have been attacked in the last 2 years by arms, by airplanes, by Scud missiles, by chemical weapons. If we do not prevent this through UN Security Council, at least we need to support their right of self-defense.
The opponents to lifting the embargo are worried taking a decision now, which could undermine an international peace conference planned next month. As the EU ministers convened, the battle to control the Syrian town of Qusayr continued with air and ground bombardment by government forces. Government forces and Hezbollah fighters were battling to drive out the rebels from the key town. The United Nations Human Rights Navi Pillay appealed on behalf of thousands of civilians trapped in Qusayr for their freedom.
I'm extremely concerned at current reports suggesting that hundreds of civilians have been killed or injured and thousands may remain trapped by indiscriminate shelling and aerial attacks by government forces in Al-Qusayr. Safe passage must be given to any civilians wishing to leave.
The rebels have kept up their resistance to a massive assault on the strategic town against the regime's forces and Hezbollah fighters. The fighting had unleashed heavy artillery and tank fire to seize more rebel territories and secure a route between the capital Damascus and the coast in the north. Government forces are believed to have seized about 2/3 of Qusayr, but the price has been high and rebels insist they are preventing any further advances. Luay Balqar for the news at 10.
Journalists continue to pay the ultimate piece covering of the civil war in Syria. The latest victim was Yara Abbas, a reporter for the state-run Al-Ikhbariya news channel. She was killed by sniper fire near a military airport close to the town of Qusayr on the Lebanese-Syrian border. State TV said Abbas, in her mid-20s, was targeted by rebels. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, a pro-opposition monitoring group, said several members of her television team were also wounded in the attack. Abbas was a common sight for Syrian television viewers. She frequently reported alongside forces from the front line of Syria's two-year conflict. As violence intensified in Syria, Israel went on alert after a rocket was fired from southern Lebanon. A rocket has earlier struck Hezbollah movement's stronghold in South Beirut. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon voiced deep concern at Hezbollah's admitted combat role and the risk that the Syrian conflict will spill into Lebanon and other neighboring countries. Ban urged all concerned to immediately cease supporting the violence inside Syria and instead to use their influence to promote a political solution to Syria's tragedy. Khal reports.
Amid the heightened tension in Syria, the Israeli military sounded a siren as part of a drill instructing Israelis to take cover in the event of an attack. The alarm echoed across Israel and the occupied Golan Heights at midday and again in the evening, instructing people to head for shelters and stay there for at least 10 minutes. At Tel Aviv's City Hall, workers rushed to the designated shelter staircase at the sound of the siren. Everyone knew that it was just a drill, but workers seemed to take the exercise seriously. In the occupied Golan Heights, Syrian residents of Majd al-Shams are at particular risk. Despite living in an area of high tension that has seen some rockets fired from Syria, the resident of Majd al-Shams did not run to shelters when the siren sounded. But they say they are ready for anything. Further increasing tension, a rocket was fired from South Lebanon towards Israel. There were no reports of casualties or damage. An Israeli military spokeswoman said an explosion had been heard in northern Israel and soldiers were searching the area as an investigation was underway. Another Israeli military source said the explosion was probably caused by a mortar. United Nations peacekeepers stepped up patrols on the border area. Israeli lawmakers accused Lebanon's Hezbollah group of being behind the attack and vowed Israel could prevent any attack.
We know that the Hezbollah is active in Syria and we will not allow any shootings of any missiles into Israel. We have said it in the past and we are determined to prevent it in the future.
The rocket launch came a day after 2 rockets were fired into the Hezbollah-controlled southern part of Beirut. A Grad rocket landed in a car showroom in the Mar Mikhail district, lightly wounding 5 people, including 3 Syrian workers. Another struck an apartment building in Shiyah district, but no one was hurt. Military experts arrived at the explosion scene while the army went off the area. Lebanon's Interior Minister Marwan Sharbel said the attack was aimed at creating tensions in Lebanon. The latest escalation was a further sign that the conflict in Syria is spilling over into the whole region. Khal for the News at 10.
In Iraq, a wave of bombs exploded in markets and mainly Shiite neighborhoods across Baghdad, killing more than 50 people. The attacks were the latest in a series that raised fears that the country risks sliding back into broad sectarian conflict. Police and hospital officials said at least 11 blasts tore into busy markets and shopping areas in districts across the Iraqi capital. Among the attacks were twin bomb blasts just several hundred meters apart that killed at least 13 people in the Sadr city area. No group claimed responsibility. In new provocations against Palestinians, Israeli women soldiers stormed Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied East Jerusalem. The soldiers in military uniform were escorted by police as they entered from Bab al-Maghariba gate. Later, small groups of extremist Jewish settlers broke into the holy compound in a further provocation and violation of the sanctity of one of Islam's holiest sites. Israeli occupation forces also arrested about a dozen Palestinians during sweeps into Arab neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and the West Bank cities of Hebron and Jerusalem. Meanwhile, the Israeli daily Haaretz reported that Israeli authorities had expanded areas around Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank, paving the way for construction of new settler homes. How much time do you think an interview on TV or radio lasts? Half an hour? An hour? Well, Norwegian crime writer Hans Olav Lahlum has set a new world record for the longest interview. He spent more than 30 non-stop hours chatting in an online broadcast. Lahlum discussed topics ranging from US presidents to his fictional characters during the online show hosted by VG, the online arm of Norwegian tabloid VG. Lahlum, the left-wing politician, historian and top chess player, rarely stumbled during the Gabfest, which also covered subjects such as his preferences for mixing puddings and kebabs. Shortly after surpassing their previous record, set by a New Zealand radio broadcast last year, Lahlum plunged into a weighty discussion on world literature in general and Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen in particular. The new record awaits approval from Guinness World Records. Goalkeeper Iker Casillas and striker Fernando Torres will return to the main squad as coach Vicente Del Bosque named a 26-man group for next month's Confederations Cup in Brazil. Del Bosque said Casillas was in good form and ready for the Confederations Cup. The Spaniard coach also omitted Casillas' Real Madrid teammate Diego Lopez. The list will be cut back to 23 after the final round of La Liga matches next weekend. For the Confederations Cup, Spain have been drawn in Group B with Uruguay, Tahiti and Nigeria. The 8-nation warm-up event for next year's World Cup runs from June 15th to 30th.
Arbeloa, Azpilicueta, Piqué, Albiol, Sergio Ramos, Javi García, Jordi Alba, Monreal, Busquets, Javi Martínez, Alonso, Cazorla, Iniesta, Xavi Hernández.
Newell's Old Boys maintained their 3-point lead in the Argentine Championship by crushing Boca Juniors 4-0 3 days before the decisive Libertadores Cup quarter-final clash. Midfielder Ronaldo Cruzado gave Newell's a 7th-minute lead with a penalty after he was fouled by goalkeeper Sebastian D'Angelo. Boca had Lisandro Magayan sent off just before half-time for stamping on forward Maximiliano Urruti. Horacio Orzan added the second goal with a right-footed shot, and just over a minute later, Martin Tonso punished the keeper again with a left shot into the same bottom corner of the goal. Urruti got the fourth. A look at the weather forecast. A pleasant night tonight in hilly areas and mild elsewhere with northwest to brisk winds. Blowing dust in the Badia Desert region. A slight rise is in the forecast tomorrow. Therefore, moderate weather will prevail in most areas except, of course, in the Jordan Valley and Aqaba, where it should be relatively hot. Winds will be northwesterly moderate to brisk, blowing dust in the Badia. Aqaba should expect mild conditions tonight with northerly moderate to brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To close, here is a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King tells the closing session of the World Economic Forum that the Middle East has the potential to bring about real change. The Prime Minister says the more than 500,000 Syrian refugees who fled to Jordan place additional strains on its limited resources. And as heavy fighting rages in Syria, European ministers struggle to end divisions on the conflict. And that's the end of tonight's news. I'm Raad Liptoush. Thank you for watching and have a good night.